Tonight, the city's elite gather at the Fitzgerald mansion, a dazzling spectacle of power, wealth, and perfectly curated illusions. Among them, Alexander Monroe, a man who built an empire but shattered his family, arrives with his glamorous new girlfriend Celeste, convinced he has it all. He's here to flaunt his success, to erase the past with a blinding display of present triumph. But a single, elegant figure by the grand fireplace is about to shatter his carefully constructed world. His ex-wife, Vivian Hart, once a quiet shadow, now an acclaimed author, will challenge every truth he thought he knew, forcing him to confront not just the woman he lost, but the man he failed to become. The Fitzgerald mansion glittered like a fallen constellation against the inky canvas of the late autumn sky. A symphony of crystal chandeliers rained light onto polished marble floors, reflecting the muted shimmer of silk gowns and the crisp lines of bespoke tuxedos. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old money, hummed with the low murmur of society's peacocks mingling, their laughter a delicate, almost brittle counterpoint to the soft jazz drifting from a hidden alcove. Tonight was the annual charity gala, the unofficial start to the social season, and a stage where reputations were either cemented or quietly dismantled. Alexander Monroe, a man sculpted by ambition and an unwavering belief in his own image, strode into the grand foyer as if he owned the very air he breathed. His charcoal suit, tailored to an inch of perfection, hugged his broad shoulders, a testament to countless hours in a private gym. Beside him, Celeste Vale, a vision in a crimson silk gown that cascaded like liquid fire, clung to his arm. Her dark hair, a sleek waterfall around her shoulders, swayed with an almost practiced grace, and her smile, perfectly sculpted by a subtle lip tint, was a beacon of calculated glamour. They were, in Alex's mind, the epitome of a power couple, a public declaration that he had moved on, not just successfully but spectacularly. "We look incredible, darling," Alex murmured, his voice a low, confident rumble, though a tremor of something less assured vibrated beneath the surface. He squeezed Celeste's hand, a gesture meant to convey intimacy, but which subtly betrayed his underlying tension. This wasn't just another party, it was an affirmation. His carefully constructed life demanded constant validation. Celeste, perceptive beneath her polished exterior, offered a soft, knowing smile. "Of course, Alex, we always do." Her eyes, however, were already scanning the room, absorbing the intricate social dynamics with an almost anthropological precision. She felt the subtle tremor in Alex's grip, a minute tell that spoke volumes about his need for control, for appearance. They navigated the throngs with practiced ease, Alex nodding imperiously at familiar faces, Celeste offering gracious smiles. He was acutely aware of the glances, the whispers, the subtle nods of approval that followed them. This was his element, his stage. He felt a surge of triumph, a smug satisfaction that momentarily eclipsed a gnawing anxiety he refused to name. Then his gaze drifted past a cluster of laughing socialites, past a towering floral arrangement, to a quiet alcove by the grand baronial fireplace. And there she was, Vivian Hart. She stood not in the vibrant hues of societal expectation, but in a dress of minimalist black, a garment that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the surrounding light. It was simple, elegant, yet imbued with an undeniable authority. Her dark blonde hair, pulled back into a sophisticated chignon, revealed the delicate curve of her neck and the faint glimmer of pearl earrings. She held a champagne flute, not ostentatiously, but with an easy, natural grace. She wasn't performing, she was simply present, and in that presence she commanded attention far more effectively than any overt display. Alex's breath hitched. The carefully constructed facade of indifference he had worn for years, the narrative he'd meticulously crafted about Vivian being the past, crumbled in an instant. His composure fractured like delicate ice under a sudden blow. He watched as she took a slow sip, her gaze sweeping the room with an almost serene detachment, landing briefly on him. a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of her glass, a discreet, shared acknowledgement of their history, a silent, "I see you." And then her eyes moved on, without lingering, without judgment, without the slightest hint of the turmoil that now roiled within him. It was a gesture of such exquisite, casual closure that it wounded him more profoundly than any angry glare ever could. "Alex?" Celeste's voice, soft but firm, cut through his sudden trance. "Gregory is signaling us." Gregory, a long-time friend and influential host, stood by a group of serious-looking men in expensive suits, clearly investors. Alex tore his gaze from Vivian, forcing a confident smile back onto his face. "Right, of course." He squeezed Celeste's arm, perhaps a little too tightly. As they moved, Celeste's perceptive eyes flickered between Alex's rigid profile and Vivian's serene back. She had heard the whispers, the vague allusions to Alex's unfortunate first marriage, but seeing Vivian now, she understood why Alex's voice had tightened, why his hand had clenched. This was no ordinary ex-wife. This was a woman who had not merely survived, but had blossomed, emanating a quiet power that even Alex, with all his bluster, could not ignore. Gregory greeted them effusively, clapping Alex on the shoulder. "Alex, Celeste, good to see you both. Come, I want you to meet the Rothschilds. They're keen to hear about your latest venture." Alex launched into an animated discussion about his new real estate development, his voice smooth, confident, betraying none of his internal disquiet. But even as he spoke, a part of his mind remained tethered to Vivian, watching her from the corner of his eye. She was surrounded by a small group, her laughter light and genuine, occasionally piercing the din. She seemed happy, genuinely happy. A dangerous, unwelcome thought surfaced. Had he been so wrong about her? Had her quiet nature masked a strength he had utterly failed to perceive, let alone appreciate? His focus wavered, his practiced spiel about market projections and innovative design suddenly feeling hollow. Celeste noticed, her fingers subtly digging into his arm as a reminder. He forced himself back, but the edge of his confidence had dulled. Then, inevitably, the social currents of the party shifted, pulling them closer to Vivian's orbit. Gregory, ever the master networker, spotted Vivian and, with a knowing wink to Alex, began to usher them in her direction. "Vivian, my dear, come, I must introduce you to Alex and Celeste. You two know each other, of course, but Celeste hasn't had the pleasure." His tone was light, but his eyes, when they met Alex's, held a flicker of amusement. He enjoyed the drama, the subtle tension of such encounters. Vivian turned, her expression unreadable, a polite, almost practiced smile gracing her lips. Her eyes, the color of warm amber, met Alex's for a fleeting moment, devoid of anger or bitterness, simply distant. It was this indifference that was the most potent weapon. "Alex," she greeted, her voice calm, composed, without a trace of the raw emotion he remembered from their final bitter arguments. "Celeste, it's a pleasure." Her hand, cool and slender, met Celeste's in a brief, almost perfunctory shake. Alex, suddenly tongue-tied, managed a strained, "Vivian, you look, well." It was the best he could muster, feeling inexplicably awkward, like a teenager caught in a lie. Celeste, however, recovered quickly. "Vivienne, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Alex has mentioned you, of course. I'm Celeste Vale." Her smile remained impeccable, but her eyes, keen and intelligent, were assessing Vivienne with a quiet intensity. She noted the effortless elegance, the quiet authority. She noted Alex's discomfort, the slight stiffening of his posture. "Pleasure," Vivian replied, her gaze lingering on Celeste for a moment before returning to Alex, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her expression that signaled the end of polite pleasantries and the beginning of a subtext-laden duel. "It's been a long time, Alex." The air crackled with unspoken history. Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He tried to project an aura of unconcern, but he knew he was failing. Vivian's mere presence was a challenge to his carefully constructed narrative, a silent reproach that resonated deep within him. He wanted to escape, to pull Celeste away, but society's rules dictated this dance. He was trapped, forced to endure the polite, razor-edged conversation that was about to unfold. Across the room, Vivian's friends began to drift back to her, creating a subtle barrier, a shield against Alex's intrusion. He was acutely aware of the dynamics at play, the unspoken solidarity she commanded, and he, the self-proclaimed king of this social jungle, found himself suddenly on the defensive, exposed and vulnerable in a way he hadn't anticipated. The night, he realized with a sinking feeling, was far from over, and its meticulously planned perfection had already begun to unravel. As the polite, stilted exchange wound down, Vivian, with a graceful dip of her head and a murmured excuse about greeting another acquaintance, dissolved back into the embrace of her own circle. Alex watched her go, a strange cocktail of resentment and unwilling admiration churning within him. "She's different than I imagined," Celeste remarked, her voice thoughtful as they drifted away from Vivian's orbit. She didn't sound critical, merely observant. "More serene." "Alex, you've never really told me much about your marriage." Alex waved a dismissive hand, attempting to reassert control over the narrative. "Nothing to tell, darling, just one of those things. Grew apart, different ambitions. She was always rather quiet, preferred her books to my business dinners." He tried to make it sound like a failing on her part, a deficiency that justified his eventual departure. But even as he spoke the words, they tasted false. Celeste, however, wasn't easily swayed. She had seen the flicker in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. "Quiet isn't the same as uninteresting, Alex, and she certainly doesn't seem to be lacking in ambition now. She looks quite successful." Her words, innocent as they sounded, were a barb. Alex felt a prickle of annoyance. "Yes, well, everyone gets lucky sometimes. A fluke, perhaps." He downplayed it, desperately clinging to his carefully constructed image of Vivian as the milder, less dynamic half of their former partnership. The truth, of course, was far more complex. In the early years of their marriage, Vivian had been an aspiring writer, her notebooks filled with stories and characters, her imagination a vibrant, secret garden. But Alex's ambition had been a voracious beast, devouring every spare moment, every ounce of their shared energy. His career had demanded constant attention, endless social engagements, and a wife who would play the perfect supporting role, charming, beautiful, and unobtrusive. Vivian's quiet passion for writing had been gently, then not so gently, nudged aside. "Later, Viv," he'd often said, "when the business is more stable, when we have more time." But later never came. Her stories remained locked in her mind, her voice stifled by the clamour of his own assent. He had wanted a reflection, not a partner with her own brilliant light. His infidelity had been the final, brutal blow, not just to their vows, but to Vivian's already fragile sense of self-worth. It had confirmed every insecurity, every whisper that she wasn't enough, that her dreams were insignificant. When she finally left, it wasn't with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating whimper, taking their young daughter, Emma, and leaving behind a hollow space Alex quickly filled with more work, more acquisitions, more external validations. He had convinced himself she was the one who couldn't keep up, the one who didn't understand the demands of his world. Now, looking at her across the glittering ballroom, admired and self-possessed, he felt the foundation of that self-serving narrative begin to crack. Just then, a portly man with a booming laugh and an unlit cigar in his hand approached Vivian. Alex recognized him instantly. Marcus Thorne, a powerful figure in the publishing world. Alex watched, a strange premonition coiling in his gut. Thorne embraced Vivian warmly. "Vivian, my dear, you're a sensation." Wings of Glass is still flying off the shelves. We're already discussing the second print run for the international release. Such raw, honest prose, a true masterpiece of emotional resilience. He raised his voice slightly, oblivious to the proximity of her ex-husband. You really peeled back the layers of a difficult marriage, didn't you? So many women see themselves in your protagonist, feeling stifled, unseen, then finding their voice. Remarkable. The words hit Alex like a physical blow. Wings of Glass, a bestseller, a masterpiece, a story of a difficult marriage, of being stifled, unseen. He felt a sudden chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. Could it be? Could her quiet revenge be this public, this devastatingly effective? He remembered her early, nascent ideas for stories, the way she would sometimes describe characters who felt trapped, whose creativity was suffocated. He had always dismissed them as melodramatic, self-indulgent. Now, they were a best-selling phenomenon, praised by the formidable Marcus Thorne. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He reeled, his mind racing. He had been so sure he'd won the breakup, that he was the victor, the one who moved on to bigger and better things. Vivian was supposed to quietly disappear, to fade into obscurity, perhaps write a few obscure poems in her spare time. Not this dazzling public triumph built on the very wreckage of their shared past. Celeste, who had heard Thorne's gushing praise, turned to Alex, her perfect smile faltering slightly. Her eyes, suddenly sharp, met his. Alex, Wings of Glass? That's quite specific. Before Alex could formulate a denial, before he could dismiss it as coincidence, Vivian moved. She detached herself from Thorne and, with a subtle shift of her body, turned to face Alex and Celeste directly. Her expression was no longer polite and distant. It was focused, serious, and held a quiet, controlled fire that made Alex's blood run cold. "Alex," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the party, clear and resonant enough that a few nearby conversations paused. "We need to talk, not about gossip, not about my book, but about Emma." Alex's carefully constructed veneer of confidence shattered completely. This wasn't the public, polite confrontation he might have expected, designed to humiliate him in front of their peers. This was something far more surgical, more precise. This was about their daughter. "Emma?" he managed, his voice sounding hollow, defensive. "Yes, Emma," Vivian affirmed, her gaze unwavering, holding his. "You send her money, Alex. You pay the bills, and you think that makes you a father. But do you know her favorite color? Do you know she's terrified of public speaking despite her bright mind? Do you know her best friend is a girl named Maya who loves coding? Do you know about her solar system project? About the Saturn model she's painstakingly crafting from recycled materials?" Each question was a thrust, piercing through his carefully constructed image of himself as a successful provider. He stumbled, grasping for answers, finding none. He knew none of these things. He provided the funds, yes, but he hadn't provided presence. He hadn't provided a father's ear, a father's hand, a father's emotional scaffolding. Celeste, standing beside him, shifted uncomfortably. Her face, usually so composed, was etched with a mixture of surprise and dawning realization. She saw the raw, exposed truth in Alex's stunned silence, the undeniable evidence of his profound absence from his daughter's life. Vivian continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "Fatherhood isn't a transaction, Alex. It's a relationship, and you've been absent from the only one that truly matters. Money doesn't buy a bond. It doesn't dry tears. It doesn't listen to dreams, and it certainly doesn't make you a father." With that, she turned, her black dress swirling around her, and walked away, leaving Alex standing in the glittering, suddenly suffocating ballroom, exposed and utterly shamed. The quiet hum of the party, which moments before had sounded like a celebration, now seemed to mock him, highlighting his profound and undeniable failure. Celeste's presence beside him, which had been a source of pride, now felt like a crushing weight, an unwelcome witness to his public reckoning. The glass he had lifted at the beginning of the night now felt like it held the bitter dregs of his own making. The fallout from Vivian's public indictment was swift and brutal for Alex. He spent the remainder of the party in a haze, the champagne flowing freely, each glass doing little to dull the sharp edges of his humiliation. He watched Vivian from a distance, her profile silhouetted against the grand windows, radiating an untouchable poise. She laughed, she conversed, she simply existed with a grace that seemed to mock his own unraveling. The more he drank, the more his jealousy spiked, an ugly, visceral emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. How dare she be so indifferent, so radiant, so utterly free of him? Celeste, her patience wearing thin, finally cornered him near the bar, her voice low and strained. "Alex, you're making a spectacle of yourself. What was that? About Emma?" Her eyes, usually so calculating, were now wide with a genuine confusion that bordered on disgust. "She's exaggerating," he slurred, waving his hand dismissively. "Just trying to cause a scene. You know how ex-wives are." His attempt at a casual shrug failed spectacularly, his shoulders hunching defensively. "No, Alex, I don't know how ex-wives are," Celeste retorted, her voice hardening. "But I do know what I just witnessed, and it wasn't an exaggeration. It was the truth, wasn't it? You don't know those things about your own daughter." She paused, her gaze piercing. "And you've been staring at Vivian all night. Not at me, Alex. At her." He tried to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. The alcohol had stripped away his usual smooth defenses. "Don't be ridiculous, Celeste. I'm with you." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie, a hollow declaration. Celeste took a step back, her crimson gown shimmering with a chilling finality. "Are you, Alex? Are you really?" She didn't wait for an answer. She simply shook her head, a sigh escaping her lips, and walked away, disappearing into the throng. Alex stared after her, a sudden cold panic seizing him. He stumbled back to his apartment later, the metallic taste of too much champagne sour in his mouth, the accusations of Vivian and Celeste echoing in his mind. He called Celeste, leaving slurred, desperate voicemails. Finally she picked up, her voice cold and distant. "Alex, I think it's time we called it a night, and maybe called it quits." "What? No, Celeste, don't be absurd," he stammered, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "It's just the party, the drinks. Come on, you know how it is." "I know how it is, Alex," she replied, her voice devoid of warmth. "And I know what you just called me. You just called me Vivienne." The words hung in the silence, a brutal, undeniable truth. He froze, the alcohol-induced haze momentarily clearing, replaced by a searing wave of shame. He had called her Vivian. In his drunken stupor, the past and present had blurred, his obsession with his ex-wife surfacing in the cruelest possible way. "Celeste, Goodbye, Alex." The line went dead. He stared at his phone, the silence in his opulent, empty apartment suddenly deafening. The night had ended in spectacular disaster. He had lost Celeste, publicly humiliated by Vivian, and forced to confront a truth about his fatherhood that he had meticulously ignored for years. The next morning, the shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him. Sunlight, usually a welcome beacon in his pristine apartment, felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing every flaw. He cancelled his morning meetings, a rarity for the notoriously driven businessman. He couldn't face the world, not like this. He wandered aimlessly, the silence of his apartment amplifying his thoughts. Eventually, he found himself, almost unconsciously, drawn to the local independent bookstore, a place he hadn't stepped foot in since his college days. And there, prominently displayed in the front window, was a stack of books, their covers gleaming. Wings of Glass by Vivian Hart. He stared at the cover, a minimalist design featuring a delicate, fractured butterfly. The title, the author's name, it was all real. This wasn't a fleeting success. This was a phenomenon. A deep, unsettling curiosity, mingled with a morbid fascination, compelled him inside. He walked past rows of glossy bestsellers, past the scent of old paper and fresh coffee, until he stood before the display. He picked up a copy, his fingers tracing the title. He bought it along with her two previous, less celebrated novels, all of which he had ignored when they were first published. Back in the sterile silence of his apartment, he started to read. He devoured Wings of Glass first, then the others. The words, Vivian's words, flowed over him, painting vivid pictures, evoking emotions he had long suppressed. He saw flashes of their life, of his ambition, of her quiet despair, all refracted through the lens of her fiction. Passages about a wife feeling invisible, about betrayals both grand and subtle, about a child's quiet hurt, pierced him like shards of glass. He recognized himself in the oblivious, work-obsessed husband, in the cold, dismissive dialogues. He saw Emma, small and vulnerable, yearning for a father's attention. For the first time in a long, long time, Alex felt true shame, a profound and visceral understanding of the damage he had wrought. It wasn't about losing Celeste, or his public image. It was about the quiet suffering he had inflicted, the dreams he had crushed, and most importantly, the connection he had sacrificed with his own daughter. The book ended, but the echo of Vivian's voice, her truth, reverberated through him. He sat in the silence, the weight of his failures pressing down, until a single, undeniable thought broke through the fog of regret. He had to change, not for Vivian, not to win her back, but for Emma. For himself. He picked up his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. He scrolled to Vivian's contact, a number he hadn't dialed in years, only used for texts regarding Emma's schedule. He composed a message, then deleted it, then started again. He didn't want to sound defensive, or entitled, or even contrite in a way that sought forgiveness. He wanted to convey genuine intent. Vivian, I read your books, I saw myself. I was wrong. I want to change, especially for Emma. He sent it. Then he waited. No reply. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of his past. The next morning, instead of heading to the office, he drove to Emma's school. He stood at Gate 3B, where he used to occasionally pick her up years ago before his schedule became too demanding. The bell rang and a stream of children poured out, a riot of backpacks and excited chatter. Emma emerged, her bright red backpack slung over one shoulder, her head bent in conversation with a friend. He saw her, and a wave of emotion washed over him, tenderness, regret, a fierce desire to make things right. He raised a tentative hand. Emma! She looked up, her blue eyes, so like Vivian's, widening in surprise. Her smile, which had been bright, faltered. Dad? Her voice was a mix of confusion and guarded curiosity. Her friend, a small girl with braids, gave him a wary glance before waving goodbye to Emma. The reunion was awkward, stilted. Hi, honey, he managed, feeling inexplicably clumsy. I wanted to see you. Emma hugged her backpack tighter. Okay. Her eyes, usually so open and expressive, were wary, holding a defensive wall he recognized as a reflection of his own absence. He knew instinctively that words alone wouldn't breach it. It would take more, much more. This was only the first step on a long, arduous path. The first moments with Emma at the school gate were fraught with an unspoken history, a delicate dance around the chasm of his absence. Emma's initial surprise had quickly settled into a polite, almost wary curiosity. He could see the questions in her eyes, questions he knew he couldn't answer with mere words. Can we maybe get some hot chocolate? Alex suggested, his voice softer than she was used to hearing from him. He recalled Vivian mentioning Emma's fondness for it. Emma hesitated, then shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Okay. They walked in silence to a small, cozy cafe a few blocks from the school, a place filled with the warm scent of coffee and pastries. Alex found a quiet corner booth, feeling conspicuously out of place in his tailored suit amidst the casual after-school crowd. He watched Emma, her small hands wrapped around a steaming mug of hot chocolate, her eyes wide as she studied the whipped cream melting into the dark liquid. "So?" Alex began, trying to sound casual. "How's school?" It was a standard, almost meaningless question, and he instantly regretted it. Emma shrugged again. "It's fine. We have a big science project coming up." This was his chance. He remembered Vivian's stinging words at the party. "Do you know about her solar system project? About the Saturn model she's painstakingly crafting from recycled materials?" "Oh, really? What's it about?" he asked, trying to infuse genuine interest into his voice. Emma's eyes brightened slightly. "The solar system. I chose Saturn. Mum says it's her favorite because of the rings. I'm making a model out of an old styrofoam ball and some cardboard for the rings. It's really hard to get them to stay balanced." She began to animatedly describe the challenges of attaching the rings, the specific colors she was using, the miniature moons she was painting. And Alex listened, truly listened. Not just nodded politely, waiting for his turn to speak, but listened to the excited chatter of his daughter. He asked questions about orbital paths, about the materials she was using, about the difficulties of painting something so small. He saw the genuine passion in her eyes, the way her hands moved as she described her creative process. For the first time, he wasn't just hearing words. He was connecting with her. "That sounds amazing, Emma," he said, and he meant it. "You know, when I was your age, I was fascinated by the stars. I wanted to be an astronaut for a while." He shared a small anecdote about trying to build a telescope out of cardboard tubes, a rare glimpse into a more vulnerable, less guarded version of himself. Emma giggled, a bright, pure sound that warmed something cold and hollow inside him. "Really? You don't seem like the astronaut type, Dad." "Maybe not anymore," he admitted with a wry smile, "but I still think about it sometimes." The hot chocolate seemed to act as a bridge, melting some of the ice between them. They talked for nearly an hour, about her friends, about her favorite books, about a funny incident with her art teacher. He discovered she loved historical fiction and secretly wanted a pet hamster. Small details, insignificant to anyone else, but revelations to him. He found himself genuinely enjoying her company, a stark contrast to the performative social interactions he was used to. Later that evening he called Vivian. He was careful, humble. "Vivian," he began, "I just picked up Emma from school. We had hot chocolate. She told me all about her Saturn project. She's really talented." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that spoke volumes. "That's good, Alex," Vivian finally said, her voice cautious. "I appreciate you spending time with her." "I want to do more," he said, his voice earnest. "I want to be a better father, Viv. I really do." Another pause. "Words are easy, Alex," she replied, her tone firm, unwavering. "Consistency is what matters. You can visit her, but it needs to be regular, and on her terms, and mine. No sudden grand gestures, no promises you can't keep. Just presence. And don't mistake this for anything more than co-parenting. My trust, especially, is not easily regained, not for anything beyond Emma." He swallowed, accepting the terms. She had every right to withhold trust, to erect boundaries. "I understand," he said quietly. "I accept." And so began his routine commitment. The next day he arranged his schedule for going a late afternoon meeting to pick up Emma from school. And the day after that, and the day after that. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he was still distracted, his phone buzzing with work calls. But he made an effort to put it away, to focus on Emma, on their conversations, however trivial they seemed on the surface. He learned about her favorite snacks, her little quirks, the subtle shifts in her mood. He helped her research Saturn, guiding her to relevant books, printing out images of its magnificent rings. He even helped her with her cardboard ring structure, a task that required patience and a surprising amount of spatial reasoning. He saw the way her guardedness slowly began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism, a growing ease in his presence. These were small, faithful acts, far from the grand, public gestures he was used to. But they were genuine, they were consistent, and slowly, painstakingly, they began to re-knit the delicate bond between father and daughter. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, Emma mentioned, almost as an aside, "Mom went on a date last night with Victor. He's really funny." Alex felt a familiar pang of jealousy, a tight knot in his stomach. Victor. He had heard the name before, a vague whisper in the periphery of his life. He swallowed hard, forcing a neutral expression onto his face. He reminded himself of Vivian's boundaries, of his renewed commitment to fatherhood, not romance. "Oh, that's nice, honey," he said, trying to sound genuinely pleased. "As long as your mom's happy." He knew, even as the words left his mouth, that it was a lie. A part of him, the old, possessive Alex, chafed at the thought of another man in Vivian's life. But this new Alex, the one trying to be present, trying to be a better father, knew he had to let that go. Later that week, Celeste called. He braced himself, expecting an apology, a reconsideration. Instead, her voice was calm, resolute. "Alex," she said, "I've been doing some thinking, and I realized you're not over Vivian. Not truly. You're stuck in regret, in what-ifs, in trying to prove something to her or to yourself, through her. And I deserve someone who is fully present. I'm moving on. I wish you well, truly, but I can't be part of this anymore." She hung up before he could respond. This time, there was no drunken stupor to dull the blow. He recognized the truth in her words. She was right. He had been fixated, not just on Vivian's public success, but on the past, on proving something. Celeste, in her brutal honesty, had given him a strange gift, the final push towards focusing entirely on his own internal repair and on Emma. The midpoint of his journey arrived not with a crescendo, but with a quiet, firm grounding. His consistent presence began to truly warm Emma. He resisted the urge to drink, to lose himself in superficial distractions. His world, once defined by acquisitions and accolades, began to center around school runs, homework help, and quiet conversations about Saturn's rings. Progress was real, but fragile. He was walking on newly formed ice, aware that one wrong step could shatter everything. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of genuine hope, a sense of purpose that transcended the superficial glamour of his former life. He was learning that true power wasn't about what he owned, but about who he was and who he was becoming for his daughter. The rhythm of Alex's new life settled into a pattern of small, deliberate actions. Each school pickup, each shared snack, each conversation about Emma's burgeoning interests was a thread, carefully reweaving the fabric of their relationship. Emma's smiles became less guarded, her chatter more spontaneous. He found joy in the mundane, a stark contrast to the high-stakes thrills he once craved. He was learning to be present, a skill far more challenging than any business deal he'd ever closed. One afternoon, eager to share a moment with Emma, Alex arrived at her school with a bouquet of flowers. He held out a vibrant bunch of white lilies, a flower Vivian had always adored. He remembered her face lighting up years ago when he'd occasionally, on a rare whim, brought them home. He hoped Emma would appreciate the gesture. "Look, honey," he said, presenting them, "for you." Emma's eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Lilies? They're pretty, but you never brought Mum flowers." She stated it innocently, without malice, merely as a simple, unvarnished observation. The words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. Alex froze, the bouquet suddenly feeling heavy, a symbol of his past failures. Emma wasn't trying to hurt him. She was simply recalling the reality of their family history. The lilies, intended as a gesture of affection, a belated echo of his romantic past, were now reframed, not as a symbol of love, but of neglect. He had only brought Vivian flowers before their marriage, in the initial flush of courtship, or on rare, performative occasions. Never just because, never consistently. He swallowed, forcing a smile. "You're right, Em. I didn't. But you know what? You deserve flowers, just because." He handed them to her, a gesture that now carried a new weight of genuine, unburdened affection. Emma's face softened, a genuine smile replacing the slight uncertainty. She buried her face in the blossoms, inhaling their sweet fragrance. The misfire had, unexpectedly, offered a fresh insight. His acts of love needed to be authentic, specific to Emma, not recycled attempts to undo past wrongs with Vivian. Meanwhile, the shadow of Victor lingered. Emma occasionally mentioned him, usually in passing, painting a picture of a charming, attentive man. Alex tried to quell the persistent pang of jealousy, focusing instead on his own journey of repair. He knew he had no claim on Vivian's personal life, nor did he want one, not in the old way. His commitment was to Emma. A few weeks later, Vivian was preparing for a short writing retreat, a necessary break from motherhood and her demanding literary schedule. Alex saw it as an opportunity for another honest conversation, one without the public gaze of the party or the mediating presence of Emma. He found Vivian in her small, sunlit study surrounded by books and drafts. She looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and guarded welcome. "Alex," she said, "everything all right with Emma?" "Emma's great," he replied, taking a breath. "I wanted to talk to you, alone, before you leave." He hesitated, then plunged in. I read your books, Viv. All of them, especially Wings of Glass." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, her posture stiffening. "And?" she asked, her voice cool, prepared for defensiveness, for accusation. "And," he continued, meeting her gaze, "I saw it. I saw me. I saw the harm I caused, the ways I minimized you, silenced you, neglected you. I understand now what you were trying to say at the party. About Emma, yes, but also about everything." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not saying this to try and win you back, Viv. That's not what this is. I just wanted you to know that I see it. I see my part in it. And I'm truly sorry. I want to be a better father to Emma. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. I want to earn her trust, and yours, as a co-parent, as a decent human being." Vivian studied him, her amber eyes searching his, looking for any flicker of manipulation, any trace of the old Alex. What she saw instead was a genuine humility, a raw honesty he had rarely displayed in their marriage. She recognized the sincerity in his voice, the weight of his confession. It wasn't about love or reconciliation in the romantic sense. It was about accountability. "Alex," she said, her voice softer now, "I believe you're trying. I see it with Emma. She's happier, more settled, and I appreciate you acknowledging the past. It's a start, but trust, as you know, is built brick by painstaking brick." He nodded, accepting her cautious optimism. He wasn't asking for absolution, only for the opportunity to prove himself, not with words, but with consistent, humble action. Vivian left for her writing retreat, and Alex continued his daily routine with Emma. A week later, Vivian returned, looking refreshed, but also with a subtle shift in her demeanor. There was a quiet resolve in her eyes, a certain lightness. That evening, as Alex dropped Emma off after a park visit, Emma, bouncing with childish energy, blurted out, "Mom, guess what? You and Victor broke up." Alex's breath caught. He looked at Vivian, who offered a faint, almost wry smile. "Yes, honey, we did." He kept his expression carefully neutral, his heart doing a small, unbidden leap. "Oh," he managed, feigning surprise. "I'm sorry to hear that, Viv." Vivian shook her head. "Don't be. It was for the best." Later, as Emma scampered inside, Alex lingered. "Everything all right, Viv?" she sighed, a weary but resolved sound. It was fine at first. Victor was charming, attentive. But then, on the cruise, he showed his true colours. He got impatient with Emma, subtle at first, little dismissive comments when she asked too many questions or took too long to get ready. And he started making comments about sharing responsibilities more evenly, implying I should push more of the parenting onto you, so we'd have more us time. Alex felt a surge of protective anger, instantly understanding. Victor hadn't just been impatient, he had seen Emma as an inconvenience, a distraction from his own desires. "He just didn't get it, Alex," Vivian continued, her voice firm. "Emma is non-negotiable. My life revolves around her, and any partner I have needs to understand and embrace that, not see her as a burden. So I ended it. Quickly. There was no point dragging it out." Alex, suppressing the surge of relief he felt, focused on comforting Vivian. "You did the right thing, Viv. Emma deserves someone who sees her as a priority. You're a wonderful mother." Vivian met his gaze, a hint of surprise in her eyes at his genuine praise. "Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that." He realized then, with a profound clarity, that his transformation wasn't about winning Vivian back, or even about proving himself to her in the old romantic way. It was about consistent humility, about genuinely centering Emma, and about honoring Vivian as a co-parent and a person. True change wasn't a performance, it was a sustained, quiet dedication. It wasn't about seeking recognition for his efforts, but about doing the right thing, day in and day out, regardless of the outcome. The lilies had been a misstep, a vestige of the old Alex. His quiet, genuine support for Vivian, his recognition of her strength as a mother, was the true measure of his shift. This was the deeper understanding he now pursued. The weeks that followed Victor's departure solidified Alex's resolve. The absence of a romantic rival, while a subtle relief, underscored the truth of his new mission. It wasn't about vying for Vivian's affection, but about earning a genuine place in Emma's life and a respectful partnership in co-parenting. The temptation to fall back into old patterns of self-serving ambition was still there, a faint siren song, but the memory of Emma's guarded smile, the sting of Vivian's words, and the quiet joy he found in their daily routines anchored him. He continued his school pickups, his presence a comforting constant for Emma. He helped her with her homework, patiently explaining fractions or listening intently to her summaries of history lessons. He celebrated her small victories, a perfect score on a spelling test, a beautifully rendered drawing, and offered quiet comfort for her minor disappointments. He was no longer just a provider, he was a participant. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alex found himself walking past the independent bookstore again. He spotted Vivian inside, perched on a stool near a towering bookshelf, a notebook open in her lap, lost in thought. The sight of her, absorbed in her craft, stirred a different kind of emotion in him than the raw jealousy of the party. It was a mixture of respect and a quiet understanding of the depth of her talent, a talent he had once dismissed and stifled. He hesitated at the doorway, then, taking a deep breath, stepped inside. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. Vivian looked up, her pen pausing mid-stroke. A flicker of surprise, then a polite, almost neutral expression. "Alex, everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Viv," he said, offering a small, genuine smile. "I saw you through the window, just wanted to say hello." He gestured vaguely at her notebook. "Working on the next masterpiece?" She gave a faint, almost shy smile. "Something like that. Ideas for a new collection of essays." He remembered her dreams, her early struggles, the years she spent silently cultivating her voice while he chased his own glittering ambitions. And then a thought sparked, connecting his business acumen with his desire to genuinely support her. "Vivienne," he began, "I know this might sound strange coming from me, but the city's annual book biennial is coming up. It's a huge event, lots of literary patrons, publishers, readers. What if..." What if we put together an exhibition for you?" Vivienne stared at him, bewildered. "An exhibition? Alex, I'm an author, not a painter. And besides, we?" The last word was tinged with suspicion. "Not we, as in a couple, Vivienne," he clarified quickly, anticipating her reservations. "And not to own it, or for my benefit. It would be entirely focused on your work, on Wings of Glass, on your journey as a writer. A retrospective of your success. A curated exhibition, perhaps with excerpts from your novels, photos from your book tours, early drafts, maybe even a reading. I could help with the logistics, organize the venue, manage the press, get the right people involved. I have contacts, resources, people who owe me favors. I could make it truly spectacular in a way that elevates your work and gives it the recognition it deserves." He continued, his voice earnest, his business instincts finally channeled into something selfless. "It wouldn't be about me, Viv. It would be about celebrating you, your voice, your achievement. You deserve that spotlight, genuinely. It would be a way to honor your work, to show Emma how proud I am of her mother, and a way for me to contribute practically without any agenda other than your success." Vivienne listened, her expression slowly shifting from skepticism to a guarded curiosity, then to a quiet astonishment. She saw the genuine respect in his eyes, the absence of the possessive gleam she remembered. This wasn't a grand gesture to win her back. It was an offer of practical support offered with humility and focused entirely on her professional flourishing. He was proposing to use his formidable organizational skills, his influence, to shine a spotlight not on himself, but on her. "Alex," she said, her voice soft, "that's surprisingly generous and entirely unexpected. I just want to help, Viv," he said simply. "No strings attached, just a genuine desire to see your work celebrated, to make amends for everything I stifled." She looked at him for a long moment, truly seeing him, the transformation evident not just in his words, but in the quiet sincerity of his demeanor. "Let me think about it," she finally said, a faint smile touching her lips. "But thank you, Alex. Truly." He nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction spreading through him. He hadn't asked for anything in return, not even a renewed friendship. He had offered, genuinely, and that felt like a profound step forward. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. Vivienne, after careful consideration and consultation with her agent, agreed to Alex's proposal, albeit with very clear boundaries and oversight. Alex threw himself into the project with the same intensity he once reserved for his business deals, but with a crucial difference. The goal was not self-aggrandizement, but the elevation of someone else's achievement. He personally coordinated with the biennial organizers, securing a prime exhibition space. He leveraged his contacts to enlist top designers to create elegant displays showcasing Vivienne's literary journey. He painstakingly selected photographs from her early life, her author photos, images of Emma. He commissioned a short documentary film about her writing process. He ensured the lighting was perfect, the flow intuitive, the atmosphere one of reverence for her artistry. And all the while he continued his daily school runs. He helped Emma with her science fair project, which, thanks to his earlier intervention, was now a dazzling, meticulously crafted model of Saturn, its rings shimmering with glitter. He attended her parent-teacher conferences, genuinely engaging with her educators, something he had rarely done before. He cooked dinner for Emma when Vivienne had late meetings. He was, in essence, curating not just an exhibition for Vivienne, but a life of present fatherhood for Emma. Vivienne observed his dedication with a guarded optimism. She saw his meticulous attention to detail for the biennial, the thoughtful way he presented her work. But more importantly, she saw his consistent, unwavering presence in Emma's life. The subtle nods of recognition, the genuine appreciation from Emma, the quiet pride in his eyes, it all spoke of a man truly changed, a man who understood that true value lay not in grand, self-serving gestures, but in humble, sustained care. The door, once firmly closed, had begun to creak open, allowing in a sliver of cautious trust. The night of the book biennial arrived, a crescendo of glittering anticipation. The city's main exhibition hall, usually a sterile space, had been transformed into a labyrinth of literary celebration. Publishers, critics, authors, and eager readers mingled beneath banners announcing new releases and literary awards. But in one corner, bathed in soft, inviting light, was a space that hummed with a different kind of energy. The Worlds of Vivian Hart, a retrospective. Alex stood at the periphery of the exhibition, a quiet observer. He wore a simple dark suit, unadorned, a deliberate choice to fade into the background. Beside him, Emma, dressed in a pretty, age-appropriate dress, clutched his hand, her eyes wide with wonder. He had kept his promise. This was Vivian's night, a celebration of her work, not his. The exhibition was elegant, tasteful, and profoundly moving. Large backlit panels displayed excerpts from Wings of Glass and her earlier novels, each passage chosen to highlight her evocative prose and emotional depth. There were blown-up photographs of Vivian at different stages of her life. A young woman with a hopeful, slightly shy smile, a contemplative author signing books, a radiant mother holding a tiny Emma. A glass display case held a handwritten manuscript page, her intricate script a testament to the arduous process of creation. Another featured a small, tarnished typewriter, a symbol of her quiet beginnings. A steady stream of attendees flowed through the space, their murmurs of admiration audible. Critics whispered about her evocative prose, readers lingered over quotes that resonated deeply, and fellow authors nodded in respectful acknowledgement of her artistry. The space radiated authenticity, a stark contrast to the performative glamour of the Fitzgerald Mansion party. Vivian herself stood at the center of the exhibit, surrounded by admirers, her black dress this time accessorized with a shimmering silver necklace that caught the light. She looked poised, confident, and genuinely moved by the outpouring of appreciation. Her smile was warm, her gaze clear and direct as she answered questions, signed books, and accepted congratulations. She was not performing. She was simply basking in the well-deserved recognition of her life's work. Alex watched her, a profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. Not the pride of ownership or of having created this success, but the pride of witnessing it, of having played a small, supportive part in helping it shine brighter. He saw Emma's face, alight with wonder and adoration for her mother, and that, he realized, was the true reward. Eventually, Vivian excused herself from her admirers and walked towards them, her gaze softening as she reached Emma. She knelt, embracing her daughter warmly. "What do you think, sweetheart?" "It's amazing, Mom," Emma exclaimed, her voice muffled against Vivian's shoulder. "Everyone loves your books." Vivian chuckled, then straightened, her eyes meeting Alex's. Her expression was complex. Gratitude, a hint of surprise, and an undeniable acknowledgement of his efforts. "Alex," she said, her voice low, "this is truly magnificent. You've outdone yourself." He shrugged, a genuine, humble gesture. "It's your work, Viv. It deserves to be seen." "No," she insisted, shaking her head gently. "It's more than that. The care, the detail, the way you curated everything. You listened to my suggestions. You anticipated what I'd want. You did this not just professionally, but with genuine respect. And I see that. I see the effort you've put into Emma's life too. You're different. Genuinely different." Her words, an honest and unsolicited acknowledgement, resonated deeply within him. It wasn't praise he had sought, but to hear her say it, to see the genuine trust in her eyes, was more fulfilling than any business accolade he had ever received. "I'm trying, Viv," he said, his voice earnest, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not perfect, and I know I have a lot to make up for. but I promise you, I'm committed to being a present, reliable father to Emma for the rest of my life, and to supporting you in whatever capacity you'll allow. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent daily amends." Vivienne looked from Alex to Emma, then back to Alex. A soft smile, a true smile, spread across her face. "I believe you, Alex," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I believe you." It wasn't a romantic capitulation, not a declaration of renewed love. It was something far more profound, more meaningful, an earned trust, a recognition of genuine change, a new foundation for co-parenting and mutual respect. The fragile bridge they had been building had finally become sturdy enough to bear the weight of their shared future. The indifference that had once wounded him so deeply was gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance, a cautious hope. And in that moment, for Alex, it was everything. Months folded into seasons, marking the passage of time not with dramatic pronouncements, but with the quiet, consistent hum of rediscovered family life. The book Biennial was a resounding success, elevating Vivienne's profile further and cementing her status as a literary force. Alex, though he had poured his energy into its flawless execution, remained in the background, a silent, proud supporter. His reward wasn't public acclaim, but the subtle, growing warmth in Vivienne's eyes and the unabashed joy in Emma's. Their shared routines became the bedrock of their new dynamic. School pickups were no longer a chore or an obligation, but a cherished part of Alex's day. He learned about Emma's latest schoolyard dramas, her triumphs in art class, her evolving opinions on literature. He helped her with homework, occasionally wrestling with a particularly tricky math problem, their heads bent together over textbooks. These moments, once dismissed as mundane, now felt sacred, imbued with the quiet dignity of presence. Vivienne, in turn, began to cautiously open up. She started sharing drafts of her new essays, her new novel, with Alex. He read them meticulously, offering sensitive, thoughtful feedback, his sharp business mind proving surprisingly adept at analytical critique, devoid of the old dismissive tone. He challenged her where necessary, praised her where due, always with genuine respect for her craft. He wasn't trying to rewrite her story, he was helping her refine it, a true partner in her creative process. One ordinary Tuesday evening, the scene unfolded that Alex once thought impossible. The apartment, no longer pristine and empty, now felt lived in, warm. Alex, having learned a few basic recipes, was in the kitchen, carefully stirring a pot of pasta sauce, the aroma of garlic and tomatoes filling the air. Emma, perched on a stool at the kitchen island, meticulously helped Vivienne at her laptop, sorting through research for a new historical fiction project. Laughter, soft and genuine, punctuated their conversation as they debated the merits of a particular historical figure. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the living room, illuminating the bookshelves now filled not just with Vivienne's works, but with Emma's colourful storybooks, Alex's business journals, and a growing collection of shared reads. The quiet hum of domesticity was a symphony Alex had never known he craved, a melody far sweeter than any applause. Finally, dinner was ready. Alex brought the steaming bowls of pasta to the dining table, a simple wooden table that had once seemed too large for a single person. Now it felt perfectly sized. Emma, chattering about her day, carefully placed a hand-drawn picture of Saturn next to her plate. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, a comfortable blend of Emma's school anecdotes, Vivienne's literary insights, and Alex's observations on a local community project he was now passionately involved in. There was no pretense, no performance, no need to impress. Just three people sharing a meal, sharing a life. Mid-meal, Vivienne raised her glass of water, a quiet smile gracing her lips. Emma, sensing the moment, mirrored her action with her juice glass. Alex followed suit, a lump forming in his throat. "To us," Vivienne said, her eyes meeting Alex's, then Emma's. "To our family, Alex nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. "To our family," he echoed, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with presence. The past remained the past, a history of mistakes and lessons learned, but it no longer defined their present or dictated their future. The wounds had healed, leaving scars, but also new strength. The future was collaborative, hopeful, and most importantly, grounded in the daily, consistent care they offered one